You're listening to Fire Ecology Chats, a podcast series by the Association for Fire Ecology.
Good morning, everybody. This is Bob Keane again. I'm the editor-in-chief of the journal Fire Ecology, the internationally renowned journal that publishes anything on fire ecology. And we have a very special guest, and we're going to talk about a very special paper today. We have today Charlotte Remps, who's going to talk to us about crown fires that remove fire-sensitive canopy dominant from oak-juniper woodlands, the results of a long-term monitoring of fires. Welcome, Charlotte. Could you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Charlotte Remps. I'm an ecologist with the Texas chapter of the Nature Conservancy, where I've been studying Texas ecosystems for almost 20 years. And a big part of my job is to use on-the-ground research and monitoring to help land managers understand how we can meet our land management goals. And this paper is an important part of that.
Well, we are sure proud to have you here today and talk about this paper on Fire Ecology Chats. So I read this paper, was very excited. Could you give us the lowdown on what this paper is about?
Yes. So this paper was conducted on the Fort Cavazos military reservation. It was formerly known as Fort Hood. Some folks may know it by that name. And in 1996, there was a huge fire, over 9,000 acres. And then in 2009, we had about a 1,500 acre reburn of part of the original fire. And so this set up a really cool opportunity to see how oak juniper woodlands respond to crown fires, because when we do prescribed fire, generally we keep things much lower intensity. And we found three really interesting things. The first one is that our oaks and other hardwoods could successfully recruit after the fire, which is kind of unusual because deer browsing is keeping these trees from recruiting in a lot of other parts of central Texas and the southeastern U.S. The second thing we found is that even 24 years after the first fire, ash juniper is still almost completely absent from these burned areas. And that's surprising because in our grasslands, we have to burn every 3 to 5 years to keep the juniper out. The third thing that we found, because these fires burned a few overgrown juniper encroached savannas, is that even one very high intensity crown fire is not enough to restore a savanna. We saw those savannas regrow very dense very quickly, which is probably not surprising because we know from a lot of other research that oak savannas and oak woodlands need repeated continued management to keep them open.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? It's what I thought was interesting about the paper is the importance of juniper. I wonder if you can tell me what the implications of this loss or gain in juniper is.
Yes. So in central Texas, we have a very cool bird called the golden-cheeked warbler. It is an endangered species. And one of the things that us Texans is very proud of is that all the golden-cheeked warblers in the world were born in Texas. So they're all Texan. They go to Central and South America to spend the winter, but they always come back home. But what these fires do is essentially destroy the habitat for this golden-cheeked warbler. Golden-cheeked warblers need oak juniper woodlands. They need the oaks because that's where they get a lot of their food from. They need the junipers because they use the shredding bark from big old junipers to build their nests. And then they also forage for insects in the juniper crowns. And many studies have found that warblers prefer woodlands where juniper makes up around half of the canopy. There's a little bit of wiggle room in there. So when you burn these woodlands and for 20 plus years, there is no juniper, these warblers have completely lost those woodlands as habitat. And at the rate that the juniper is coming back, it's probably going to be many more decades before there's enough juniper for these woodlands to really be high quality warbler habitat again. And so this means that warbler habitat really, really needs to be protected from these super high intensity fires if we're going to maintain the populations of this endangered bird.
Oh, okay, wow. So how can management and research use this information to provide better habitat for the warbler?
Well, fire protection is going to be the name of the game here. And I love a good prescribed fire just as much as the next person. But fire, at least extreme fire, crown fires, does not have a role in golden-cheeked warbler habitat. And so we can use prescribed fire, we can use mechanical treatments, all the good fuel reduction practices that we know about around the warbler habitat. because all of these fires started in grasslands and because of the conditions that they were burning in, then jumped into the canopies of the woodlands. So it'll be important to keep the fuels around the woodlands low enough that if a fire does get started, it just remains a grass fire. I think the other thing that managers can take away from this, two other things. One is that controlling deer populations is really important because both for the warblers and for other birds, they also need those oaks. And if the deer populations are too high and the oaks couldn't regenerate, then we've completely lost even just the woodland structure. And Fort Cavazos has a very active hunting program, and that's why the deer populations there are lower than in the rest of the state. And then the other thing to take away is thinking about savanna restoration. And here is the place to use prescribed fire a lot, because you can kind of use, if you have a crown fire, you could maybe use that as a reset button, but that's not enough. You're going to have to keep burning and maybe even do some mechanical treatment if you want those beautiful open oak woodlands.
Wow, isn't that interesting? That's great. What a nice paper. Very interesting. I actually encourage everyone to read it. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I think this paper really highlights the importance of long-term monitoring and taking advantage of the natural experiments that wildfires give us. Because if you had asked me when we started this work, or when I took over this work, somebody else started it, I would not have predicted that juniper would have remained absent from these woodlands for so long. Again, because we have to burn so often to keep it out of the grasslands. And then we looked at the data after 10 years, we're like, well, there's some juniper coming in, things are going to snowball, the juniper's going to start coming back quickly, and it hasn't. And the only reason we know that is because we've been able to monitor these woodlands now for 24 years.
Well, I really want to thank you for coming on and talking about your paper today. It's an exciting paper, and I encourage people to read it. Thank you, Charlotte, for your time. Would you like to recognize any funding agencies or people?
Yes, early parts of this work was funded by a cooperative agreement between the Department of Defense and the Nature Conservancy. And then Department of Defense has continued to invest in this long-term monitoring. I also really want to thank Laura Hansen, who had the foresight to start this project in 1996, right after the first fire. And without her, we wouldn't have this very cool data set. And then finally, I'd like to acknowledge my two co-authors, Carla Picanich and Janelle Sperry, who both work for the Department of Defense.
Well, thank you so much again, Charlotte. I really appreciate it. Fellow listeners, please tune in again for the next Fire Ecology Chats. If this paper really piqued your interest, you know what? You can get it for free. You don't have to pay a darn cent for it. Charlotte has already paid for you to actually read it for free. So please feel free to go to our website, download this paper, and enjoy its wonderful findings. Thanks again, Charlotte, and thank you. This is Bob Keane signing off, Fire Ecology Chats.